Okay, so gonna talk about Leo's birth story, and I don't really think have we even sat down to really talk about the entire thing, or just parts of it.
Yeah, we sat down and talked about it for a while. Kind of debriefed.
But okay, so going into it, I had a general birth plan, and I don't know. I don't really like to call it a plan because it was. At the end of the day, I wanted a healthy baby to be born safely, but I wanted there to be no pain meds. I didn't want an induction. I didn't want a C-section. I didn't want an episiotomy or anything like that, and I wanted to have a doula and a midwife. And the doula we did end up having, and I know that you thought it was really beneficial.
Yeah.
For you and for me. And she walked with me throughout the pregnancy as well, so we had a good relationship going into birth, so I think that helped it not be awkward, because I think it'd be awkward just to have a random person come to be with you at your birth.
Yeah. It's nice to have her the whole time.
Okay, I have a bunch of notes here because I probably will not remember a lot of the details. But, okay, so contractions started sporadically on a Monday evening. They were kind of intense. Like, I told you I was having them around supper time, but then we went to bed. They weren't consistent, so I didn't think anything of it. I just thought they were Braxton Hicks. And then I woke up at midnight, and I started to have stronger contractions, and they were 5 minutes apart, and they kept coming consistently. I ended up waking you up because I just didn't want to be alone. Kind of freaked me out a little bit. And then I texted our doula. I let her know what was happening. Because at this point, I didn't know if I was in active labor. I didn't know if this was the real thing. I didn't know if this was just like super early labor and it was going to be a while yet. But I just told our doula what was going on, gave her a heads up. And that continued until the morning, so I didn't really get any sleep. Ended up calling into work for that Tuesday because I was just so tired and I didn't know if I was actually in labor. And then our doula ended up calling me and kind of talked to me about what was going on and told me that she put her doula clothes on. And I was like, wait, what? You did? Because I didn't know this was the real thing. And she was like, yeah, I'm expecting him to get here tonight. And that kind of blew our mind a little bit because it just kind of came out of nowhere, I felt like. And I was 39 weeks pregnant in a couple days.
Yeah, we expected that we thought it would be a little late.
We thought it was going to be a couple weeks yet. But, about 39 and a half weeks, I want to say it was. And then, so labor slowed down in the morning, and I guess that's pretty normal because naturally a lot of women give birth at night because it's like safer. So if you think about animals in the wild, they're most likely going to give birth at night because it's dark and calm.
Was it Jen that told us, that our doula that told us that?
Yeah, our doula told us that. So she told me to anticipate that labor would slow down and maybe speed back up later in the day. But at 11 a.m., Jacob had an eye doctor appointment scheduled, and I told him to just go to it because I thought it was going to be a while yet, and he really needed new glasses, and I didn't want him to have to reschedule it.
It didn't seem like the contractions were to a point where we were going to be going to the hospital anytime soon.
No, I don't really remember having very many contractions in the morning, honestly.
No.
It really slowed down. But then almost immediately after he left, they got a lot more intense, and they were coming every 7 minutes. But these were the most intense contractions I had had. And with every single one, I'd get up and walk into our kitchen and hold on to something and sway. So I was just and I would try to fall asleep in between them. So I kept laying down and then getting up, laying down and getting up. And then you were probably gone for an hour.
Yeah, just shy of an hour.
Yeah, you were gone for quite a while. And when you got home, I kind of told you what was going on. And something else that I wanted while I was in labor was to receive the Eucharist. So at that point, Jacob texted our priest, who we had talked to about this already, and the priest said, okay, I'll meet you up at the church in 30 minutes, so Jacob could pick up Jesus and bring it home to me.
And at this point, though, it was kind of funny because you mentioned you were sleeping and then get back up. During this time, I didn't really know a lot of how to help because they were so sporadic. It was kind of difficult to tell. But
I also didn't really want to be touched at this point.
Yeah.
Like, you would try to do a hip squeeze to help me out, to like add counter pressure, but I think it made it hurt more at that point.
yeah, and I was actually just doing homework.
Yeah, he was
So-
just doing homework, and he was timing my contractions while he was there, because we were, I didn't think anything of it. They were 7 minutes apart. I was like, okay, they should be getting closer and closer together as things progress. But I did keep our doula updated. So, okay, backtrack a little bit. You did end up getting the Eucharist. We both were able to receive the Eucharist at that point. And then our doula called shortly after that. And I'm trying to think, it was probably about noon, well, maybe like 1 o'clock, 1 or 2 o'clock at this point
Yeah,
in
early
the afternoon. And our doula calls, and I started having a contraction right as she called and right as I answered the phone. And I couldn't talk through them or anything. I just needed to like work through it. So Jacob kind of talked through it for a little bit. And then when I'm able to like talk again, because they're about probably a minute and a half long, if I remember correctly. At that
Yeah.
point, those were also the longest contractions I was having. But she kind of made a comment. She's like, yeah, if you don't start heading to the hospital in a couple hours, I will probably check in for you. And we're like, what? And she's like, I think you should think about heading to the hospital. I'm like, but my contractions are 7 minutes apart. Like, we had done a lot of reading on labor and birth, and we're like, this isn't usually the point in which we'd consider going to the hospital. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't think I'd even gone through transition yet. So I was like, I mean, I still have time, I know that stuff can progress really quickly, but
In my mind, I was planning for a really long night.
Yeah.
So I was surprised. I thought we were gonna be leaving like evening time.
yeah,
For-
yeah, me too. Yeah, it was, so, but I do remember shortly after getting off that call, he made me like a protein shake of some sort so I could get some food in my system before leaving. And I remember eating that, and then he was finishing packing things up because we didn't have everything packed to go to the hospital yet. And he was, so okay, another thing I guess I haven't mentioned yet is I was having back labor. So Leo was flipped, like his spine would have been against my spine. So every single contraction I was getting like a bunch of pain in my back and my hips. And Jacob had done a lot of reading on different positions you could be in while you're going through a contraction to kind of help your baby flip into the correct direction. Because ideally, we wanted him to be like stomach against my spine. That's right.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So at that point, Jacob's like, oh, like, do we want to try a couple of positions? And I remember I just got super short with him and like irritated. I was like, no, we need to go to the hospital. And it was kind of came out of nowhere because prior to that, I feel like I was pretty calm. I was just like, oh yeah, like I'll try to eat something. And so Jacob's like, oh, okay. So we got everything packed up. We had already planned for his parents to come and get the dogs to take care of them for however long they would need to. And something else I remember is my entire body was quivering, and I thought I was just cold. It was really strange. I didn't really know what was going on. So we had about a 30-minute drive to the hospital, and I was having contractions about every 5 minutes throughout the entire drive. That was not fun because I couldn't move. I had to just sit there. And I also remember I felt like I needed to poop. And I tried pooping when I was here at home, and I was like, I don't know why I feel this way. But we'll get to that later. I didn't know what I was experiencing. And then I remember we get there and we check in, and they're asking me all these questions. This is the same hospital we had gone to throughout the entire pregnancy. And I was getting really annoyed because they were like, what's your address? What's your social security number? What's your phone number? I'm like, you should have all of this information. I didn't understand why they need to ask again. Because I'm sitting there like having contractions still, and they're like, oh, are you having contractions? And I'm like, yes. And they're like, are you in pain? And I'm like, I think they said, are they painful? And I'm like, yes. Like,
Well, mind you though, the whole time though, you handled it extremely well. Like from the time that before we had even left, the reason that I was offering to do positions and things was because I didn't think you were very far along. So I was just thinking like, okay, well, let's just do some stuff to pass the time until things get worse. And then even in the car, I mean, you mentioned later how bad they were, but like, it didn't come across to me as they were being, as bad as you later described them. But I mean, I could definitely tell you were in pain.
Yeah.
But like the books that I had read was all like, hey, things are going to keep getting worse, and just prepare yourself. So my entire mind was just prepped for things to get way worse.
Yeah.
But
the way I was working through contractions, I was just really focusing on my breathing and trying to stay relaxed. Because a big thing that I kept reading is you gotta let the contractions like work. You gotta let them. You just kind of have to like ride the wave, because it feels like a wave of pain. Like it rises up, it gets to a peak, and then it goes down. So you just gotta let it happen. And I would just focus on my breathing. I would a lot of times close my eyes. I know they recommend not to do that because it might make time go slower, or they tell you to focus on like looking at something. But for me, I would just focus on my breathing and just like recognize that I needed to just let it happen, and like it was okay. Like it's not a pain that you want to go. Well, you want it to go away because it hurts, but there's a purpose and you know why it's happening. So that made it a lot easier for me mentally and emotionally to go through it. Okay, so then we went to triage, which is triage. I don't know how to say that. And that's where they check you to see how far along you are. And this was kind of funny because one lady checked me, and then she kind of looks at me and she's like, I need a second opinion. And I was like, what does that mean? Like, what? And it's not comfortable when they check you either. So I was like, do you really have to do this again? Like, please no. Then they get someone else who had been there for like 30 years. She was a really experienced nurse. And she checks me and she looks at me and she's like, I only feel a rim. And I just kind of looked at our doula, 'cause she was in the room, and our doula was like, Jamie, do you know what that means? And I'm like, no. And she's like, you're fully dilated. And I was like, what? And then I kind of got like slightly irritated because I asked her, I'm like, so do I have to go through transition yet? And she's like, no. And I'm like, when did I go through transition? Because to me, I was expecting back-to-back contractions, and that never happened. And I asked her if she's ever seen that happen before, and she said only in women who are on like their 5th child. So I don't know what that means, but I didn't really have the typical transition experience.
I think that like the anatomy, like what would have been the transition, that period, that 7 to 8 centimeters, probably happened in the car. Because
you think so?
That was when you were experiencing the most pain, and then you're feeling that need to push starting to happen too.
Yeah, that could be. I have no idea.
Yeah. I
wish I would have known. But then also the nurses kept saying, oh, he's so low, two pushes and he'll be here. And I'm sitting here thinking like, it was just crazy. Like, I did not expect that. My goal was to get there when I was like 5 centimeters dilated, and no earlier, because I didn't want to be tempted to get painkillers. And at this point, I didn't even think they were an option. So I was like, all right, well, going for the natural birth, and didn't even really expect to get here so far along. But then I remember getting to the room, and they were, putting the monitors on so we could monitor Leo's heart rate and stuff. And
doctor was getting her stuff on.
Yeah,
like her gloves and everything. I was like, okay, having a baby.
Yeah. We thought it was gonna happen soon. Kobe is getting all of her stuff on, and then at this point, I had been in labor for about 14-ish hours, and she walked in and she kind of looked at me and. Well, I think some time had gone by because she kind of walked in and was like, what's the deal? And I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, why haven't you had this baby yet? I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then she kind of made a comment about how like women having their first babies usually only have an average of like 15-hour labors or something like that. And which I don't think is true, because I know a lot of people have had much longer labors for their first child. And so she kind of killed my confidence at that point, which really sucked. I felt like I had no confidence when it came to pushing, and that kind of sucked. So out of the entire experience, that was probably the worst part. But she decided to recheck me, and she considered me 9.5 centimeters dilated, and fully dilated is 10 centimeters. So she didn't want me to start pushing yet. And my water hadn't broken, so she wanted to manually break it. But I really wanted everything to happen as naturally as possible, so I decided that we would just wait. So we pretty much spent the next 6 hours, I think it was like 6 to 7-ish hours probably, trying different positions to get my water to break. and also to try and get him to flip because I was still having back labor this entire time. And that was kind of tough because I had certain positions that wouldn't cause me as much pain, and then these other positions were a lot more uncomfortable. But pretty much the entire time, Jacob was doing hip squeezes to add counter pressure, and my doula was doing back pressure. And both those things combined would nearly eliminate the pain or made it very bearable, even if the contraction was really painful. So that was really cool. I was surprised at how much relief that actually gave me.
Yeah, having that second person there though too, because the nurses are jumping in and out. Not to say anything about the nurses.
They're amazing.
Nurses were awesome.
Nurses.
But having Jen there was really great because then when I was doing hip squeezes, you wanted your back pressure too, and then Jen could. I needed a third hand.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, that was amazing. And also, our doula had been a labor and delivery nurse prior to becoming a doula, and she was a lactation consultant. So we just really loved everything she had to offer. But we also had a nurse with me for the entire birthing process that she had trained with midwives. So she knew a lot of different positions to try to, like, I don't know, kind of reminded me of like spinning babies stuff, if you've heard of that. So she was also amazing. Like, we loved having her there as well. But then eventually I ended up letting them break my water because it just was not happening. I think Leo was too low or something, and it just wasn't, I don't know. Don't really know why it wouldn't break, but they did that. It wasn't painful or anything. I know people have talked about that being painful. It wasn't. It was just, they broke my water and a bunch of water came out. It wasn't anything too exciting. But then the OB finally considered me 10 centimeters. So she said I could start pushing. So in total, I pushed for 4.5 hours. This was definitely the hardest part for me. And I took multiple showers. They didn't have a tub or anything, but I took multiple showers because it would help to relax my body, and it also would help like have my contractions happen more consistently because sometimes it would slow down.
It seemed to make your urge to push stronger.
Yeah, it did. It was painful not to push when I was in the shower, but then when I go back to actually push, it was just, I don't know, it was really tough. And pretty much had a person on one side, person on the other side, both like using one hand to push my hips, and because everyone was kind of just around the bed at that point. And eventually, Leo was born. We did end up I needed oxygen and fluids because Leo's heart rate was dropping. And at this point, so we were 3 pushes away from Leo being here, which we didn't know it was going to be 3 more pushes. But, 3 more contractions. Did I push 3 times per contraction, I think? And Jacob said that the OB had made a comment saying, like, I'll give her 3 more contractions or something like that.
Yeah, she had seen Leo's heart rate flutter a little bit, and the nurses had been commenting to her too that they were just nervous with how long she'd been pushing, and so the doctor made the decision that she said, I'll give her 3 more pushes to try, 3 more contractions to try to push the baby out. Otherwise, we're going to try to do a C-section because she was.
Did she say C-section?
Well, she said she was going to take the baby.
Yeah, we don't know what that meant.
So when I interpreted that as like we're gonna get this baby out of here because I think at that point they were nervous about baby's health, and also they just could tell that you were very fatigued.
Yeah.
I think the hardest part, like you said, was that in that like 4.5 hours of pushing there was just you were feeling so fatigued, and you could tell that it was tough, like, because you were like falling asleep in between things because you were so tired.
I didn't recognize when I was having a contraction, honestly.
Yeah.
I would have to look at our doula, like, I feel something changing in my body, and she was like, yeah, you're having a contraction. I'm like, oh.
Yeah,
because they weren't painful anymore.
Yeah, you were just laying down, and like you'd be just, like, your eyes would be closed, and all of a sudden, you could see the bump up on the screen a little bit, and shortly after you saw the bump, all of a sudden you were waking up like, okay, it's go time again, and so yeah, that was probably the toughest part because I myself was just like hoping and praying that you were going to be able to push the baby out because I knew you would be able to. I just my concern was how much longer could you handle it, because it was at that point we were nearing what, like 30 hours total of labor.
Labor in total was 28 hours, so yeah, we're getting
Yeah.
close to 30 hours.
Yeah.
It was long, and we really hadn't slept because it was early morning of the following day, so I really hadn't slept in 2 nights.
Mhm.
So I was very tired. But
I was praying for you a lot, because it was tough to see you. Like it was they're being so exhausted, but at the same time I was just trying to like pray that you would you'd have this, like God would give you the strength to just continue just a little bit longer, because we knew how close he was.
yeah, and I remember as I was pushing, because that process was so long, I just kept praying in my head, Jesus, I trust in you, because I knew that like Leo would have to be born eventually. Like this process wasn't gonna go on forever, and I just knew I needed to like trust my body and trust whatever timing was gonna happen. But eventually, when Leo was born, he was facing the correct way. So at some point, he did flip.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember when back labor stopped. Like, I don't remember when I stopped having pain in my back, probably the last couple of hours of pushing. And then I did tear pretty bad as well, because the
second degree.
Yeah, second degree tear. The doctor pretty much had to like pull him out at that point. His forehead was out. Like I think you said he got to this point.
Yeah.
And she basically just like pushed the skin around his head.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what made me tear really bad. But I was just super happy he was born healthy, and they had to get a lot of gunk out of his throat because he wasn't breathing the best, but I could tell he was fine. I kind of just looked at our doula. I'm like, are we all good? And she's just like, yeah. And I will say I don't remember the ring of fire. People kept telling me as I was pushing, like, just ignore the ring of fire. And I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, I don't feel anything. Like, it doesn't hurt. But I had burnt my finger really, really bad the week before, and that was a lot more painful than anything I felt down there as I was pushing Leo out, quite honestly. But yeah, honestly, I often say that it was one of the most peaceful experiences of my life. I really enjoyed giving birth. That and our wedding day are the most peaceful experiences of my life. So
yeah,
it was good.
It's weird because it was definitely the most fatiguing, but also, like you said, in between things, it was very like strangely peaceful, because it was just
it was so calm, and I made sure the environment was quiet. We had the lights off. Like when we spoke, other than and at the end when we were pushing and everyone was yelling, telling me like, there's his head, and getting excited. Prior to that, everyone would whisper. Like I would be like, hey, could you do this? Or, just really quiet. Because that's just what I wanted. And I know people say this is kind of weird, but I really was not someone who made a lot of noise at all. Some women will you'll see in the movies people yell during labor. I didn't really do any of that.
Mm-hmm. You didn't want to.
I didn't. No, I just, we watched a birth video during our classes that we took at the hospital, and she did a lot of yelling, and sometimes that does help women, but I remember that kind of gave me anxiety, and I was really worried that my anxiety would spike during labor, and I didn't feel any.
Yeah, there was
I didn't feel any at all.
That head nurse there who said she'd been there doing the same work for 30 years, and she said that she had never seen a natural patient be as calm as you were during labor. So that was a big compliment to you. I mean, not that it's not like I'm just saying you handled things very well, but at the same time it's like if you were yelling or whatever, it's not changes. You still have a baby,
Yeah, but I think it just isn't really my personality to have that. I don't know. It's just something, so it kind of, it's intimate in a different kind of way, and I didn't know how to respond to that comment, because I'm like, I didn't want that. I didn't want to be loud and stuff, even though I know maybe that would have helped with the pushing. I don't know. It's definitely not trying to say anything bad about people who aren't quiet during the process. I'm just saying that's how I was. That's how I was, and it worked out really well for me, and I could look back on the experience and get excited about doing it again, hopefully someday. Just some other things about right afterward. Leo didn't latch immediately. and it took a really long time for us to establish breastfeeding, but things are going great now. He's over 6 months old, and it took us a while, but we're there. And I remember seeing him for the first time was just amazing. And I remember him being put in my arms and just like immediately like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just a crazy experience, and there's nothing like it.
I was surprised too. Like I didn't feel, people talk about the moment when your kid's born. You'll always remember it, and I will. I will always remember it. But I want to say, like, especially after all the process and stuff, for me it was more of like just relief.
Yeah.
Like the baby's here and things are and things are going to be okay.
Yeah.
And some
he's
of like
healthy.
the
Like, that was
some of
huge.
like the the loving emotion or like the fatherly emotion didn't really come for me until even probably a couple days after we brought him home.
Yeah.
Because at first it was just kind of like, okay, we have this little package here that comes home with us, and he cries and he wants mom a lot. But
He seemed to prefer you at first, though, which was kind of weird. Like, I felt like you were better at calming him down.
I don't know.
But I think that might have been because I was still trying to build up my confidence and, like, trying to calm him down. I think I had this fear that if I would try to calm him down, it wouldn't work.
I think
So I often just, like, let Jacob do it.
I think it was more so because you couldn't move yet. Like,
That's
you
true.
were on the bed. I could bounce him. He liked
Yeah,
that.
that's true.
So that I think was the difference. But yeah, just I guess the reason I say that I didn't feel all that like fatherly emotion until I got home and started realizing things is just don't feel bad if the emotions aren't there right away because it wasn't.
It's a big deal.
It takes some
big
time to
event.
process.
It's like exhausting in a great way. But another thing I guess I didn't mention is I said how I wanted a midwife, and we did have a midwife planned, but she was out with COVID, so she couldn't be there. And we had known she had to cancel one of my appointments like the week prior because she was out with COVID, and I wasn't sure what day she was going to be back. So whenever I found out that I was in active labor, then I asked our doula to kind of like reach out to the midwife because she was in contact with her. She likes to keep up with everyone in like the area that her like, I don't know, people she's being a doula for that they might give birth with. And I just asked her, I'm like, can you just see if the midwife's going to be there? Because I didn't want to show up and be surprised. I was like, I was aware that things were probably not going to go 100% as I expected because things never do. And the doula was not going to be coming back until the next day after Leo was born. So we ended up having, it was actually the OBGYN that did our first ever ultrasound for Leo. And that was actually when that was really nice. At least we knew her. There was one OB we had never met, so at least it was one of the OBs that we knew.
Yep.
But overall, it was good. Any final comments about anything?
Women are amazing.
Our bodies are awesome. Like getting to experience that was amazing.
Yeah, it was awesome, and now we get the little Leo man.
Yes. And then having the child to love on is like 10 times better. But yeah, that is all.